There is no question that she absolutely nailed this debate and made a mockery of him.
Boy, it was just a blast of persuasion principles.
He's using a combination of credibility and authority and social proof.
I think what's going on here is Donald Trump equates the size of his crowds
Oh boy.
with the size of something else.
She laid out the bait. This was a steak that she just put on a gold platter and said, have some.
Counterintuitives are incredibly helpful in rhetoric to try to get audience attention.
This is The War to Win Minds,
a limited series about how the political battle is really won and lost inside our brain.
I'm Matt Robison, writer, podcaster, and former campaign manager.
And I'm Lauren Goldstein, a psychologist and pollster for Change Research.
Today, Episode 4, the nuclear bomb of political persuasion. So far in this mini-series, we've looked at the psychology of how politics works inside our brains through the lens of political ads. To keep up the battle metaphor, each ad is like a bullet. But when you get a big presidential debate, it's like an atom bomb of persuasion going off. Campaigns spend months and people spend careers trying to prepare their candidates to use literally every trick in the book and cram them into an hour and a half. Sometimes they pull it off, sometimes they don't. So this episode is part 1 of a 2-part episode where we're going to take a look at the big debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And this is going to be a different look than anything you've seen before, and certainly different than what you get on CNN. The issues, the fact-checking, even the analysis that is pretty much agreed 100% that Harris won easily. That's all great and valuable. But we're going to look inside what each candidate was trying to do inside our brains and inside each other's brains, and whether it might have worked. And by the end, I think you'll see why psychologically there was such a Harris crush in the debate. So let's bring in Lauren. So Lauren, as a psychologist, what do you find so interesting about presidential debates?
It's just sort of fun to watch something that you have no control over happen in the wild and watch other people react to it, because it's not an experiment, right? It's not something that I have set in motion. There's something really fascinating about seeing what lands with other people. So I'm sort of sitting there being like, oh, well, she used authority principle there. And, my husband is, no one cares, in the nicest possible way. But like, I'm watching a debate here,
That's great. So basically you watch debates for the same reason that the rest of us go to zoos. I love it. All right, look. We're going to jump right into the clips in just a moment. We've loaded up. There's so much going on. I described it as the nuclear bomb of persuasion and psychology principles. So far in this series, we've done a deep dive on one principle. Today, we're going to throw a lot of stuff out there because there's a lot of stuff going on. So again, if you hear something in here, it's like, I want to hear more about that. Let us know. We're happy to follow up on it. And finally, I want to hit the fact that I even wrote about this in Newsweek this week. One of the things about presidential debates, sort of the dirty little secret, is that usually, historically, they don't matter that much. They don't have that much of an impact on the eventual outcome of the election. In this case, we're talking about an election that's likely to come down to tens of thousands of votes spread across a few states. The margin is razor thin, and we're talking about reactions from a few people, a relative handful of people. And this is one of the things that likely could move them. So my point is, this is likely to matter. It's likely to matter a lot. And that's why I'm really happy to be jumping into this. Can we get into the first clip?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. I think Kamala Harris had 2 audiences here. I think she had the viewers, the voters, and I think she had her opponent. And you see this right off the bat with the handshake.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
Have fun.
Thank you.
All right, talk us through the psychology of what this is all about, what's going on here, and what does it do to Donald Trump?
I loved it. I loved this choice. I mean, the first thing that she did when she came out on the stage was claim his space and assert some dominance. But he was not going to shake her hand, and he was not going to travel to her side. It sort of triggered my memory of his debate against Hillary Clinton in 2016, where he was sort of stalking her around the stage. We're in such a different position today where what we're really grappling with is how do we, at the same time as we emphasize the fact that he is weak and really take away from that strongman persona, while at the same time not failing to highlight all the very real threats and dangers that his campaign poses. It's a hard tightrope to navigate because we have to really drive home that this is dangerous while at the same time making him seem small. This was a beautiful way of doing that.
Beautiful. And made him seem small, even though she's physically of smaller stature, which is something we covered before. There's something deeply embedded that we tend to ascribe more authority, more leadership qualities to people who are physically bigger, physically taller, which is why we've had so many tall men as presidents. And it's interesting that she managed to assert confidence. Confidence is a highly attractive quality in people. I will note that this can go wrong. Al Gore tried to do it against George W. Bush in 2000 in one of their debates. I think it's because she did it as a jab. She didn't do it as a hug, right? When Al Gore did it, he sort of lingered and it just began to feel uncomfortable. In this case, it super did work. All right. Let's get into our first clip in an actual exchange. We want to go right to the first question.
Do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid, and I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy.
So something bugged me as I was watching this, and I was trying to put my finger on it. Maybe you can help me put it into better psychology terms because I don't have them. It felt to me like there's a reason why we train our candidates to sort of seem like you're answering the question and then pivot. Don't go right into your pivot initially. I think it's kind of like an improv comedy. They have what they call the yes and rule or the accept and build rule. Something feels discordant to the audience if you just reject. Someone says, I'm here at a shopping mall. And then your scene partner in improv says, no, we're on a space station. And the audience goes, what? I saw what she was going for here, but it feels like an embedded social rule. It's almost rudeness to not at least acknowledge the question. I saw what she was doing, but it felt a little off. Can you put some more shape to that?
I think you've sort of put your finger on it. We sort of have to mask the pivot a little bit. This is the first question. It just takes a second to find your rhythm sometimes. And I think all of the debate prep is oriented around basically commit your talking points to memory and then embed them wherever possible. And I think sometimes it might just take a couple of minutes for the rhythm to strike you. I mean, she crushed this debate. Like overall, there is no question that she absolutely nailed this debate and made a mockery of him. There is just something that we need to acknowledge right up front of we are grading, you know, it's like having two people in front of you and wanting to measure their height. And we're using a ruler for him and Play-Doh for him.
And yeah, absolutely. It's very important to say that we're talking about the psychology of this, right? We don't want to devolve into a kind of CNN-esque, like, ooh, sick burn. We want to talk about why. Why was it in the brain? Not only did she crush him, but he's a nattering imbecile. He's a lunatic. And that's a psychology term. But back to the pivot thing. What's interesting is that she had it. She just kind of got to the perfect opening before her pivot 2 minutes later. This is what I wish she had opened with.
Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
I mean, if she had started there and then just kind of gone to, all right, and now I want to talk about forward looking in my plan. Perfect. Absolutely A+. But okay, regardless, let's get down to the rest of her answer because there are a few persuasion principles. I'm just going to call them out as we go through here. And what I want to focus on here, and maybe you'll see others, is personalizing and salience.
We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to startup small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy.
All right, so what jumps out to you here psychologically?
I want to talk about undecided voters for a second and just zoom out for a second on how people typically watch debates. It's the way that they typically watch most politics, which is like sports. You go in rooting for your team. And you are predisposed, if your team is not doing well, to blame the ref. And we saw plenty of that in the aftermath of this debate, right? Trump voters basically had nothing to say other than, well, the moderator.
Yeah, it turns out
the moderator.
Right. Admiral Bone Spurs has a glass jaw. Big surprise.
Right. So, there are not that many undecided. The reason why I'm raising this point is because we have sometimes a fundamentally off base assumption about what distinguishes an independent voter from a partisan. Independent voters tend to be less tuned into politics, less informed, and just are generally not following along as closely. There is a bit of a misunderstanding sometimes that there's this like mythical independent voter that just keeps asking for more information because they are the information seekers. They are the ones they're the only ones in the middle who are sort of evaluating all of the evidence and making really rational decisions.
CNN's focus group people said this afterwards. Yep. They literally said, well, we didn't get the details.
Right. And it's off base. It's off base. The independent voters, by and large, are just paying less attention and less informed than strong partisans. So the reason that I bring all of this up is she gave a lot of facts and policy there. She talked about a tax cut. She talked about cuts for small business owners. And she did a great job of personalizing it by telling personal stories. She gave them all the information. And what do undecided voters tend to say after debates? Well, I didn't get enough information. The information is out there.
I want to point something out about focus groups and about CNN televised focus groups. This is the opposite of science. You have subjects in an experiment who know that they're being observed. Throw it out the window. This is classic Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You are affecting your subject as part of your experiment. So ignore that. Ignore the ridiculousness of that. I just want to point out that the way she tries to get there with these undecided voters, which may have worked once you go beyond the CNN focus group panels, is personalizing and salience. So those fine-grained details about afford a car seat, that jumps out to me. As a writer, you want to put in some visual detail, and that's what she did as part of this answer. And then salience. This has to do with what is the audience interested in, and talking at a 30,000 foot level about housing policy. I don't think it's inherently interesting when you describe it that way. Helping people to afford their house, bring down the cost of rent, be able to pay that check at the end of the month, that is much more salient as a way to approach a very abstract issue.
Our first conversation that we ever had on your podcast, which was about the economy and how we talk to voters about the economy, she's doing everything right here in that she is personalizing the economy. She is talking about material things that Democrats are perceived to have an advantage on by and large, which is things like caring about families, enacting fairer policies to help working families. She's making it personal in that way rather than talking about the economy, inflation. That's what he's doing. It's not just because he has no substance and no policy. It's because he is, again, reading the tea leaves fairly accurately. When you say the economy and inflation, it's rife for people to project things. If they have bad vibes, they're going to bring them all to bear when you say things like that. And she is making it personal. She's talking about what she's actually going to do for you, talking about the economy without just talking about the economy, making it real to people.
Big shout out to your day job employer, your Change Research. When you're not moonlighting, in your like psychological interests, boy, I make it sound like you're a crime scene profiler. You are at Change Research, and Change, you helped do the best comprehensive guide to how to deal with and think about the economy for Democrats that I've seen, which is how I ended up with you on my show. People can check that out back in the Beyond Politics feed, or just Google it. Google's really useful for this kind of thing. Later in this answer, boy, it was just a blast of persuasion principles. We're going to just do one more clip from the answer on the economy. We're going to look at two more principles, authority and credibility.
What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. 16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession. You just have to look at where we are and where we stand on the issues. And I'd invite you to know that Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
So it's not rocket surgery, and yes, that was an intentional joke, to understand that authority adds weight to what you're saying from a persuasion psychological standpoint. It just sounds more powerful to have credible citations and sourcing. The New York Times says versus my grandma says, one of those carries more weight with more people. That's the psychology principles as I learned them 20 years ago. But let me ask you something now. We're in an age which Tom Nichols wrote a book called The Death of Expertise. We don't credit experts the same way we used to. Do these psychology principles operate the same way?
It's a fantastic question. Motivated reasoning is another thing that I'll bring in here to help explain why sometimes that may not be as effective as we want it to be. Motivated reasoning is basically related to confirmation bias, which I think is more the mainstream term that people are familiar with. The idea is essentially if you are bringing any motivation to bear on what you want the outcome or the answer to be, it's going to influence how you perceive the facts of the information. And you are going to be psychologically motivated to find the answer that you want to find. And that is going to potentially lead you to discredit experts in favor of some other expert that you have either identified or manufactured. Joe Rogan is not an authority on how to handle COVID, and yet a lot of people seem to cite his crazy ideas about how we should handle COVID and sort of held him up as an alternative expert to the CDC, to doctors, physicians, scientists. It's nonsense. It's motivated reasoning. It's not to say that authority and credibility hold no weight with voters anymore. It's more to say in our fragmented media world, and coupled with high amounts of motivated reasoning that are tethered to our partisan politics and treating it like sports and going out for blood, it can be really hard to cut through the noise with one psychology principle and expect it to get through to everybody.
And maybe it's a case of our sources of authority and credibility have changed in part because of social media, because it used to be that you were famous because you were a celebrity. You were celebrated for having accomplished something. Now you're a celebrity because you're famous. It's like the dynamic in our minds has gotten inverted by social media. Joe Rogan is seen as an authority because so many people follow him. A lot of people are saying, a lot of people are listening. You know, there's that social proof aspect to it. And that in itself lends credibility and authority to unlikely sources. The point is, she was both going for that here, the credibility and authority, the citation of the academic sources, and a little bit of a shiv, the Wharton thing, which did destabilize Trump. Just the first in a series of delightful, smart jabs to destabilize her audience of one of Donald Trump, and it super worked there. Let's get into the next topic from the debate, which was abortion. I want to contrast the psychology principles that each candidate was using on the question of abortion. Let's look at Trump first. We're not going to do a ton of this because it's super grating to listen to, but I want to see, for people who have been following this series, if you can spot what psychology principle Donald Trump is applying in his answer on abortion.
He said, the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened.
He's using a combination of credibility and authority and social proof. All of you, everybody wanted this. This is the benefit of living in Donald Trump's brain, I suppose. It's like you get to just manufacture the truth. And, you know, many people are saying it in his mind. So there you have it. It's nonsense. It's completely false. A majority, overwhelming majority of Democrats, in addition to a majority of independents, supported Roe v. Wade, did not want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. This is total bullshit. I'm not sure I can put a finer point on it.
You can't. That's the right term. The reason I included the front end of that, even though it is triggering for a lot of us and it makes us want to scream and throw things at the television, it's an emotional jab. And what he's trying to do is invoke what is called a valence issue. And I'm going to talk more about this later, but you know, valence is a term from chemistry. It's something that's all one way or all the other. He's sort of reframing the question of abortion because he knows that the majority of Americans support a woman's right to choose, maybe with some caveats, with some restrictions, but they fundamentally support that. And so what he's doing is he's reframing it to a valence issue that everyone is against, which is infanticide. And it's false, but that's the psychology of what he's trying to do. All right, let's look at what Kamala did in response.
20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime, a violation to their body, does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term? They don't want that. What you are putting her through is unconscionable.
So much happening. His face, I mean, the contrast of her saying what you were putting these women through is unconscionable, and his sourpuss about it is a fantastic visual contrast. And we know how much, subtle visual cues can matter and can influence people. We've talked about the visual cues are really important, and he just looks pissed. He looks sour. He does not look like he cares about what he's being accused of, rightfully accused of. One of the things that we have particularly heard from young people, but also from women over the past 2 years, they have been asking for, in their candidates for office, more passion on this issue, more rage. To be honest, they're not necessarily putting it that way, but I think that's what they want. That's what she's doing here for women and for pro-choice people across the board. She is so upset about this, visibly upset. And that is what we have been looking for 2 years.
It is very interesting coding there when you contrast it. This was the first thing that you wrote to me is look at his face when she says unconscionable. And you really picked up on something. It's subtle, but the contrast of the emotion and the energy, that is a connection point. And you also see it in the body language. We know that so much is communicated through body language that we're not picking up on verbally. We've talked many times in this series about the value of watching things with the sound off. That's super comes through here. I'll just shout out here from your pollster hat on. You wrote this to me. You really liked the branding, Trump abortion bans. That's good stuff. In terms of the psychology principles, I wanted to point out two. One was what I was talking about with Trump. He attempts to make this a valence issue by saying, I'm against infanticide. Surely you too are against infanticide. What she does is subtle and I would say brilliant by going to the idea of this is immoral. This is a moral question. She's reframing this from a legal to a moral question, and she's invoking faith. This is another valence framing. And she's taking this also, this is a more libertarian appeal to government versus your personal freedom. And that's part of her overarching freedom theme. She worked that all in there. I think the idea of trying to connect with people in terms of whatever your faith is, which is something that implies that this is part of her faith code, I think is very important. And then I just want to go to the storytelling principle. Speaking of faith, Jesus spake in parables, else he spake not to his disciples. There's a reason that the Bible is full of so many stories. Storytelling, incredibly powerful in the way we convey information to each other. And going back to the visual details, a 12 or 13-year-old, someone bleeding out in the car, in the parking lot. It's that level of visual detail. You can picture that really makes a story connect. And she fits that all into this answer. The branding, the emotional, the body language, the valence, the storytelling, the reframing. That is a psychological powerhouse of an answer.
All of it is the peripheral root of persuasion. And she did it perfectly.
Let's talk about in the first 10 minutes, he was doing his thing. And I would say objectively, for his crowd, for his audience, it wasn't ineffective. She was taking some time to warm up. She clearly did on this abortion answer. And then she turned it into a total rout. From about this point that we're about to watch here, Harris was absolutely destroying him. And we have to talk about rallies.
I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires.
She laid out the bait. This was a steak that she just put on a gold platter and said, have some. And he took the bait because he can't resist. And I almost wish that we had a clinical psychologist here rather than a social psychologist to help us understand, like, in the mind of a narcissist, what should she do here?
Can we try?
We can try. We can look
between the two of us.
I mean, I'm going to put on all the disclaimers. This is not my area, right? This is very much armchair psychology now for me.
But you're still a psychologist, okay? Like in the Venn diagram of this, you're still inside the circle, and I'm like over here.
Well, we'll see. Fundamentally, as a narcissist, he has a deeply held belief that he is fantastic and is not going to be able to resist a jab in which he is made fun of for not being fantastic. And the look on his face, like the visual expression shift when she said people leave your rallies out of exhaustion and boredom.
I think what's going on here is Donald Trump equates the size of his crowds,
oh boy,
with the size of something else. Am I being, yes, right. And so what she said, what a woman said to him was, your crowd size are small and you're unable to satisfy them, and they are leaving out of boredom. I am going to leave it there, and I leave it to our audience to decide, am I onto something or not? But I think that's why he was so triggered. Okay.
I'm not going to disagree with you.
Now go on to better substance.
What? So something else that I loved that she did in this answer is she narrated his, and she spoke straight to regular people watching the debate. You didn't see him do that. He did not do that. He talked about himself. And what's so great about her choice to narrate is, again, because he lacks the self-control and the discipline to not just talk about himself, she broke the fourth wall in a way and invited the voter into the conversation to be like, let me just show you what he's doing. Let me pull the curtain back for a second. Here's what he's doing, and here's why he's doing it. I can't tell you how much I loved that as a strategy, in no small part because it can be really difficult to figure out how to respond to somebody who is so undisciplined and who is just willing and likely to say the most ridiculous stuff, to be unable to stay on topic, to get incredibly defensive, and to just introduce insanity into the conversation. How do you handle that? And I think narrating the strategy is incredibly useful in moments like that because it helps the viewer kind of make sense of it and not believe that he's doing anything smart. He can't help himself because he's all about himself. You're not going to hear him talk about you. You're going to hear him talk about himself. And then she threw in the crowd size jab, setting him up to talk about himself. And he took the bait. It was incredible.
Trying to get someone to process more than one thing at once is a classic combat sports technique. That's the reason you feint. It's the reason you throw out the jab and you come with the cross. And that's essentially what she's doing. By narrating his strategy to him, she's making him process in real time so that he doesn't do that. We've talked about personalizing, salience, authority, credibility, social proof, valence issues, storytelling. She starts out here with another one. She starts with a counterintuitive. Counterintuitives are incredibly helpful in rhetoric to try to get audience attention. You are trying so hard to engage the audience and get a moment of central root of processing. Getting an active versus a passive audience is one of your key objectives as a persuader. And by starting with a counterintuitive, when she said, I'm going to do something really unusual here, you're getting the audience's attention and you're modifying their predispositions. It's the same brain effect as saying, you won't believe this, so you better pay attention. I love that. And I don't want to say anything more about the other aspect, kind of the Cro-Magnon aspect of Trump's brain, but suffice it to say, it worked. And the proof of that, the proof of the fact that she got deep into his brain is we got next to perhaps the standout, memeable, viral moment of the debate.